It was a rainy Tuesday evening in Kiel when Isolde Isola made the fateful decision that would change her life forever. The sky opened its floodgates as she looked out the window of her dance school and noticed a soaked man desperately waving for a taxi. Without hesitation, she offered him a ride, a spontaneous gesture of kindness. What she did not know, the handsome stranger with the piercing blue eyes was Klaus Glaser, heir to a gas station empire, and soon he would knock on her door with a secret that would shake her world. "Thank you for the rescue," he said with a charming smile as he got into her old Volkswagen, shaking raindrops from his expensive jacket. "I am Klaus." "Isolde," she replied curtly while starting the engine. "Where may I take you?" "To the waterfront promenade, if it is not too much of a detour." The drive proceeded mostly in silence, interrupted only by the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers and the gentle pattering of rain on the car roof. Isolde noticed how he occasionally studied her from the side, but she concentrated on the shiny, wet road ahead of them. When she finally dropped him off, he thanked her politely and disappeared into the pouring rain without her expecting to ever see him again. The next days passed as usual. Isolde devoted herself to her toy store, Kinderwunder, which was experiencing a real rush with the new collection of reborn dolls for babies and pets. Her mother Greta supported her actively in the business, while she herself prepared for the final exams of her business administration studies. "You should go out more, sweetheart," her mother admonished her while arranging a row of fluffy plush toys. "You work too much. Your father and I are worried." Isolde sighed. "Mama, I have no time for dates. The store is running well, and I do not want to neglect my studies." In her modest apartment in the middle-class district of Kiel Garden, Isolde lived with her parents and her younger sister Frida. Her father Herbert, a retired civil servant, still worked as an accountant at a gas station to supplement the family income. Her brother Victor, a high-ranking firefighter, lived with his family in another city and visited them only rarely. On Thursday evening, Isolde attended her weekly dance lesson in the Old Town Hall, one of the few leisure activities she allowed herself. She loved dancing, the feeling of freedom, and the opportunity to escape from everyday stress for a moment. When she entered the hall, she was surprised to see that her regular dance partner was missing. "No, sorry for being late," said a familiar voice behind her, which she immediately recognized. "My name is Klaus Glaser. I am new here." Isolde turned around and looked directly into the bright blue eyes of the man to whom she had given a ride just a few days ago. He seemed just as surprised as she was. "You?" he asked incredulously, a smile spreading across his face. "The savior in the rain." Before she could answer, their dance teacher, Mrs. Schmidt, clapped her hands and announced, "Today we will form new pairs. Chance decides." Fate, or Mrs. Schmidt's system of partner allocation, brought Isolde and Klaus together. When his hand touched hers, an unexpected electric shock ran through her. She had never danced waltz with someone who possessed such natural grace and presence. "You dance wonderfully," he remarked, as they turned to the music. "Only because you lead," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. After the lesson, as she packed her dance shoes, Klaus appeared at her side. "May I invite you for coffee, as thanks for the rescue the other day?" Isolde hesitated. There was something about this man that both attracted and unsettled her. He seemed so self-confident, so different from the people in her usual environment. Finally, she nodded. In the cozy café Meerblick, across from the dance school, she learned more about him. Klaus was about to complete his degree in petroleum engineering and was already working in his father's family business, a nationwide gas station corporation. He was currently developing plans for dry port facilities at the country's main seaports. "And what do you do professionally?" he asked with interest. I run a toy store and study business administration on the side, she answered suddenly, self-conscious in the face of his impressive career plans. A toy store, his eyes lit up. My nieces would love that. They are quite clever girls, always looking for something new. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily, and Isolde found herself laughing at his anecdotes about his family life. He told her about his older brother who managed the finances and personnel matters of the family business, about his niece who studied robotics and lived with his parents, and about Hulk, his beloved Irish setter. I love the sea, Klaus confessed. And surfing, kitesurfing, sailing, everything that has to do with water. Me too, Isolde replied in surprise. I go surfing whenever I can. As the evening came to an end, Klaus hesitated. Would you perhaps like to go sailing with me on Saturday? I am a member of the Kiel Yacht Club. Before she could answer, his phone vibrated. Klaus glanced at it and frowned. I am sorry, I have to go. A family emergency. He quickly wrote his number on a napkin. Think about it. With these words, he hurried away, leaving a confused Isolde behind, who did not know whether she should embark on this unexpected adventure. What Isolde did not suspect, Klaus had known her even before their chance encounter in the rain, and his sudden appearance in her life was anything but coincidence. He carried a secret with him that connected their two families in an unexpected way, a secret that would soon come to the surface. The next morning, Isolde woke up with an unusual feeling of anticipation. The encounter with Klaus had triggered something in her, a long-forgotten curiosity about the unknown. She looked at the napkin with his phone number, which she had carefully placed on her nightstand, and wondered if she should call him. You look different today, her sister Frida remarked at breakfast. Have you met someone? Isolde blushed slightly. No, I'm just well-rested. Frida grinned knowingly but did not probe further. When Isolde arrived at her store, she was surprised to find a large bouquet of wildflowers on the counter. Her mother, who was already serving the first customers, winked at her. A very charming young man brought them this morning, she explained with a mischievous smile. He did not introduce himself, but he wore an expensive suit and asked if you work here. Isolde's heart skipped a beat when she read the attached card. Thank you for the dance and the conversation. The sailing invitation still stands. Klaus. All day long she could not stop thinking about him. What did he really want from her? Why was someone like him, wealthy, handsome, from an influential family, interested in a simple shop owner like her? After closing the store, Isolde gathered her courage and dialed his number. He answered after the first ring, as if he had been waiting by the phone. Isolde, he said with a warmth in his voice that she could feel through the phone. I had hoped you would call. The flowers are beautiful, she replied, but you should not have. I wanted to, he interrupted her gently. So how about the sailing? Tomorrow. The weather is supposed to be perfect. Before she could reconsider, Isolde heard herself agreeing. They arranged to meet the next morning at the Kiel Yacht Club. When she hung up, she noticed her mother watching her from the kitchen door. Who was that? She asked curiously. Just a friend, Isolde replied evasively. Her mother sat down with her at the kitchen table. Sweetheart, I know that look. Be careful, yes? Not every prince on a white horse means well. He is. Not a prince, Mama. Just someone I am getting to know. But that night, Isolde could hardly sleep. She thought about Klaus, about his smile, about the way he had led her while dancing. Confident but respectful. She thought about the differences between them. He lived in a world of luxury and privilege, while she had to count every euro twice. How could something come of this? Saturday morning greeted Kiel with brilliant sunshine. Isolde carefully chose her clothing, practical for sailing, but still flattering. When she arrived at the yacht club, Klaus was already waiting for her, casually leaning against his car, a snow-white Audi. "You came," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Will I keep my promises?" she replied. The Kiel Yacht Club was a place that Isolde had only seen from the outside before. The elegant sailboats, the expensive cars in the parking lot, the well-dressed people. All of this belonged to a world that was foreign to her. But Klaus led her through the club with such naturalness, introduced her to various members, and treated her as if she belonged here, that she soon relaxed. His boat, the Windgeist, was an impressive sailing yacht, smaller than some of the ostentatious ships in the harbour, but elegant and obviously well-maintained. "My father wanted to buy me a larger one," Klaus explained as he helped her board. "But I love this boat. I restored it myself, every inch." Isolde was surprised. "You did this yourself?" He nodded proudly. "My hands are not too delicate for hard work, even if my brother sometimes claims otherwise." At sea, another side of Klaus showed itself. Here he was in his element, competent and focused. He patiently explained the basics of sailing to Isolde, let her take the helm, and laughed heartily when she almost caused a sharp course change. They sailed along the coast, past the characteristic red cliffs and green hills that fell into the sea. In a secluded bay, they dropped anchor, and Klaus brought out a picnic basket. "You thought of everything," Isolde marveled as he unpacked a bottle of white wine, fresh bread, local cheese, and various antipasti. "I like to be prepared," he replied with a sly smile. They ate and talked, and Isolde learned more about his life, about his strict but loving German governess Martha, who had worked for the family since his childhood, about his father, the CEO of the family business, and his mother, a retired judge who had made it to court president. "They expect a lot from me," Klaus admitted as he thoughtfully swirled his wine. "The younger son who has to prove that he is just as capable as his brother." "And are you?" Isolde asked directly. Klaus laughed in surprise. "That is a question no one has ever asked me. Most people assume that I'm either trying to outdo my brother or that I'm a spoiled mama's boy who cannot get anything right." "And what is the truth?" He looked at her for a long moment. "The truth is that I want to find my own way. Sometimes the family inheritance feels more like a burden than a privilege." Isolde nodded understandingly. "And I know that feeling, just differently. My parents have worked hard their whole lives so that I could study. This responsibility sometimes weighs heavily." The sun began to set slowly as they decided to return. On the way back to the harbour, they sat silently next to each other, shoulders touching, both lost in thought. When they docked at the pier, Klaus helped her off the boat. His hand held hers a moment longer than necessary, and in his eyes she saw something that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "Isolde," he began, then hesitated. An inner conflict seemed to rage within him. Finally, he shook his head slightly. "Nothing. I will take you home." On the drive to her apartment, Klaus was unusually quiet. When he parked in front of her building, he turned to her. "I have to confess something to you," he said with a serious expression. "Our meeting in the rain was not a coincidence." Isolde felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean by that?" He opened his mouth to answer when his phone rang again. With a frustrated sigh, he looked at the display. "It is my father. I have to answer." He took the call, spoke briefly, and ended the conversation with a worried look. "I am sorry. There is an emergency at one of our facilities. I have to leave immediately." He hesitated. "But we need to talk. Soon. It is important." Before she could react, he leaned forward and kissed her gently on the cheek. "Take care of yourself, Isolde." With these cryptic words, and the fleeting, a kiss, he left her behind, confused and with an uneasy feeling in her stomach. What had he wanted to tell her? And why had he claimed that their first meeting was not a coincidence? When she arrived at her apartment, she found her family at dinner. Her father looked up from his newspaper and regarded her with an unusually serious expression. "Where were you all day, Isolde?" he asked, in a tone she had not heard since her youth. "Sailing with a friend," she answered, surprised by his intensity. Her father and mother exchanged disturbing glances. "With whom exactly?" her mother inquired. "His name is Klaus Glaser." "Why?" Her father's face turned pale. "Glaser, from the Glaser gas stations." Isolde nodded slowly, an uneasy feeling spreading within her. "Yes, I believe his family owns a gas station chain. How do you know that?" Herbert Eisel set aside his newspaper and sighed deeply. "Isolde, sit down. There is something we should have told you long ago." At that moment, Isolde sensed that the secret Klaus had spoken of was bigger than she could have ever imagined, and that it connected their two families in a way that would change her life forever. Her father's words echoed in Isolde's ears as she tried to grasp the inconceivable. "The Glaser family and our family have a complicated history," Herbert Eisel began, his voice unusually quiet and tense. The story that followed was like something from a novel. 30 years ago, Herbert Eisele and Maximilian Glaser, Klaus' father, had been business partners. Together they had laid the foundation for today's gas station empire. But then came disagreements, accusations of embezzlement, and finally, a bitter legal dispute that ended up in court. Maximilian's wife, Helene, was a judge at the time, her father explained bitterly. "She used her influence. I lost everything. My share in the company, almost all of our wealth." Her mother, who had been silent until now, placed her hand on Herbert's arm. "It was a difficult time. We had to start completely over while the Glasers became richer and richer." Isolde sank into a kitchen chair, her head spinning. "But why did you never tell me this?" "We did not want to burden you with old grudges," her mother answered gently. "What happened is in the past." Isolde thought of Klaus, of his warm eyes, his honest smile. Could he really be the son of a man who had so betrayed her family? And more importantly, had he deliberately sought her out, knowing who she was? The next days passed as if in a fog. Klaus tried several times to reach her, but Isolde ignored his calls and messages. She needed time to think, to sort out her feelings. On Wednesday, just as she was about to close her store, the doorbell rang. She looked up and saw Klaus standing in the entrance, a rain-soaked Klaus with a determined expression on his face. "But I need to talk to you," he said without preamble. "Please, 5 minutes." Isolde hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. She led him to the small office behind the sales area and closed the door. "You knew it, did you not?" she asked directly. "You knew who I am, who my father is." Klaus nodded slowly. "Yes, I knew it, but it is not what you think." "Explain it to me," she demanded, arms crossed over her chest. Klaus ran his hand through his wet hair. "I only recently learned what happened back then. My father is in the hospital. A stroke. When I was organizing his affairs, I found old documents, evidence that exonerates your father." Isolde stared at him incredulously. "What kind of evidence?" "Letters, financial reports. They show that my father, that he actually betrayed your father. The real culprit was an accountant named Werner Fischer, who had created forged documents. My father found out about it, but instead of bringing the truth to light, he exploited the situation to push your father out of the business." Isolde stood up, her legs trembling. "Why are you telling me this now, after all these years?" Klaus also rose and took a step toward her. "Because it is right, because I wanted to get to know you before I told you the truth. I wanted to know what kind of person you are." And that is why you ambushed me in the rain, infiltrated my dance class." Her voice trembled with anger and confusion. "No, the rain thing was actually coincidence. I had been watching you for a while, yes, but I did not know how to approach you. When you stopped to help me, it seemed like a sign." He paused. "The dance class was planned. I admit that. I knew you would be there." Isolde shook her head, tears rising in her eyes. "You played with me, with my feelings." "No, Isolde." He tried to take her hand, but she pulled it away. "What happened between us? The day on the boat, our conversations, that was real. I fell in love with you, despite everything that stands between our families." She laughed bitterly. "In love? You hardly know me." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know your laughter, your passion for your store, your love of the sea. I know that you go to church every Sunday, that you ride a bicycle and like to watch movies. I know that you are loyal, kind, intelligent." "Have you been spying on me?" she asked, horrified. Klaus swallowed hard. "I wanted to know who the daughter of the man my father had wronged so much was, but the more I learned about you, the more I wanted to really get to know you." An uncomfortable silence spread between them. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, a fitting soundtrack for the storm of emotions in Isolde's interior. "I want to show you something," Klaus finally said, and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "These are copies of the documents I found. Also a check for the value of your father's original share in the company, plus interest for all the years." Isolde stared at the envelope, unable to take it. "Do you think money can make up for this? 30 years of deprivation, my father's humiliation." "No," Klaus answered quietly. "But it is a beginning, a sign of my intention to set things right." Her gaze met his, and for a moment she saw the sincere remorse in his eyes, the honest desire to correct his father's mistakes. But the pain and feeling of betrayal were too fresh. "I need time, Klaus. Please go now." He nodded slowly, placed the envelope on the desk, and turned to the door. "I will wait for you, Isolde, as long as necessary." When he was gone, Isolde opened the envelope with trembling hands. The documents confirmed everything Klaus had said, and the check, the sum made her gasp. It was enough money to eliminate all of her family's financial worries forever. That evening, Isolde showed her father the documents. Herbert Eisel wept when he saw the evidence that finally exonerated him after all these years. It was as if a heavy burden was lifted from his shoulders. "What will you do now?" he asked his daughter. Isolde did not know. Her heart was torn between loyalty to her family and the feelings she had developed for Klaus. Could she forgive him for lying to her? Could she enter into a relationship with the son of the man who had ruined her father? That night, Isolde prayed fervently in her small house chapel for guidance. As a devout Christian, she had learned that forgiveness was a central part of her faith. But forgiveness did not mean that one had to forget. It meant moving forward. Despite the pain, the next morning she made a decision. She would meet Klaus, listen to him, not for the sake of his apology, but for her own sake. To understand whether what she felt for him was strong enough to overcome the shadows of the past. She called him and arranged to meet him the coming Sunday after church service in the city park, a neutral place where they could talk in peace. When Sunday came, Isolde was more nervous than ever before. After church service, she walked slowly to the agreed meeting point. Klaus was already waiting on a park bench, his face serious and tense. When he saw her, he stood up, uncertain how to greet her. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. They sat next to each other on the bench, a respectful distance between them. The park was full of families enjoying the sunny spring day, children laughing and playing. Normal life continued while their two worlds were in upheaval. "I have thought a lot," Isolde began, "about you, about us." about the past. Klaus nodded, giving her time to speak. What your father did to my father was wrong, she continued. It shaped our family for decades, but... She took a deep breath. You are not your father. No, I am not, he agreed, relief in his voice. But I am his son, and I bear a responsibility to set things right. Isolde turned to him. Why? Why is this so important to you? Klaus was silent for a moment, searching for the right words. When I discovered the truth, I was shattered. Everything I thought I knew about my father was called into question. Our family's success, our wealth, all of it was based on a lie, on your family's suffering. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Isolde had already recognized as a sign of his nervousness. And then I got to know you, first from a distance, then personally. You were so real, so different from the people in my world. You had every reason to be bitter, but you were kind, generous, full of life. Their eyes met, and Isolde felt a familiar flutter in her chest. I cannot change what my father did, Klaus said, but I can try to repair part of the damage. Your father deserves justice, and if the check and documents can contribute to that, then that is only a small step in the right direction. Isolde thought of her father, how relieved he had been to finally know the truth. My father has not cashed the check, she said. He says it is not about the money. It is about the truth. Klaus nodded understandingly. Of course, the check was only a symbol. What he really deserves is a public apology, a restoration of his reputation. And what about you? Isolde asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. What do you want, Klaus? He looked directly at her, his blue eyes intense and vulnerable at the same time. I want to get to know you, Isolde. Really get to know you, without secrets, without ulterior motives. I want to know if what I feel for you has a chance, despite everything that stands between our families. The honesty of his words touched something in her. Despite all reason, all warnings from her family, she could not deny that there was something between them, a connection that became stronger the more time they spent together. It will not be easy, she warned. My family, they will need time. I know, he answered with a gentle smile. I am ready to wait. Ready to prove every day anew that I am serious. About you, about making amends. Isolde felt the wall around her heart slowly beginning to crumble. She did not know if she could trust him completely, if they would ever grow beyond the shadow of the past, but she wanted to try. One step at a time, she finally said, and ventured a small smile. Perhaps we could be partners again at the next dance lesson? Klaus' face brightened as if someone had lit a light in him. I would be delighted, he said, and carefully extended his hand. After a moment of hesitation, Isolde took it, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. It was a small step, a fragile promise, but it was a beginning. What Isolde did not suspect, while she and Klaus carefully began to build the bridge between their worlds, a storm was brewing behind the scenes. Klaus' older brother Thomas had learned of his meeting with Isolde and was anything but pleased about the possible connection to the Eisele family, and about the documents that Klaus had found. Documents that could incriminate not only his father, but also himself. The shadows of the past were far from banished, and soon they would intrude into Isolde's and Klaus' lives again, with unforeseen force. The following weeks were for Isolde like a dance on thin ice, uncertain, exciting, and with the constant danger of breaking through. She and Klaus began to meet regularly, taking careful steps toward each other. They went to dance lessons together, met for coffee after work, and took occasional trips to the sea where both could share their love of water. Isolde had told her family of her decision to give Klaus a chance. Her parents had reacted with mixed feelings, her father reserved but willing to give the matter a chance, her mother clearly more skeptical. "Be careful, my child," she had warned. Sometimes the apples do not fall far from the tree, but the more time passed, the more certain Isolde became that Klaus was sincere. He had not only offered words, but had also followed with actions. He had confronted his father in the hospital with the found documents, and although Maximilian Glaser had initially reacted angrily and dismissively, he slowly began to realize that it was time to admit old mistakes. On an unusually warm spring evening, Isolde and Klaus sat on the terrace of a small cafe at Kiel Harbor. The setting sun bathed the sailboats and ferries in golden light, and the water glittered like liquid fire. "My father wants to meet your father," Klaus said suddenly, his voice calm but tense. "He is ready to apologize, personally and, if your father wishes, publicly as well." Isolde stared at him, surprised by this unexpected development. "Do you mean that seriously? He would do that?" Klaus nodded. "He is no longer the man he once was. The stroke has changed him, made him more thoughtful, and I believe deep inside the guilt has burdened him all these years." Isolde thought of her own father, how he had suffered under the weight of false accusations, how he had been forced to rebuild his life. A personal apology from Maximilian Glaser might not give him back the lost years, but it could help him finally find closure. "I will speak with him," she promised. Klaus placed his hand on hers, a sign of gratitude. In recent weeks, their touches had evolved from accidental to intentional, small gestures of affection that became more familiar each day. It means a lot to me that you are doing this," he said quietly, "that you are willing to build this bridge." She smiled, enjoying the warmth of his hand on hers. "It is the right thing to do." When she came home later that evening, she found her father alone in the living room, absorbed in a book. She sat down with him and told him about Klaus' proposal. Herbert Isola listened silently, his face inscrutable. "What do you think?" Isolde finally asked. Her father set aside his book and looked at her for a long time. "You know," he began, "slowly as a young man I was so full of anger at Maximilian. I carried this anger with me for decades, like a heavy stone in my chest." He paused. "But now I am tired, Isolde. Tired of hate, tired of resentment." He took her hand and pressed it gently. "If Maximilian Glaser is ready to look me in the eyes and acknowledge the truth, then I am ready to listen to him." Tears rose in Isolde's eyes. She had not expected her father to agree so readily. "You are a better person than I could ever be, Papa." He smiled tiredly. "Not better, just older and hopefully a little wiser. Faith teaches us forgiveness, does it not?" The meeting was arranged for the following week in a private room of an upscale restaurant in downtown Kiel. Isolde accompanied her father, while Klaus escorted his father, who had since been released from the hospital but still needed a walking stick. The first encounter between the two men was marked by a strange mixture of tension and melancholy. They studied each other, two aged adversaries whose battle was long past. "Herbert," said Maximilian Glaser, his voice more brittle than before, "thank you for coming." "Maximilian," Mr. Eisel replied with a curt nod. They sat down, the two old rivals facing each other, their children next to each other, like a symbolic bridge between the families. Klaus and Isolde exchanged a nervous glance, both uncertain how the conversation would go. "I do not know where to begin," Maximilian began after a long moment of silence. "Perhaps with the fact that I was a coward, a greedy, ambitious coward, who saw an opportunity and seized it without thinking about the consequences." Herbert remained silent, letting the other man speak. "What I did to you and your family, was unforgivable," Maximilian continued. I betrayed you, pushed you out of our joint business, ruined your reputation, and then I enjoyed the success without ever looking back." He drew a trembling breath. "I cannot turn back time, Herbert. I cannot give you back the years you lost in struggle, but I can tell the truth, here and now, and I am ready to say it publicly as well, before the press, before court, before whomever you wish." A single tear rolled down Maximilian's cheek, and Isolde was surprised to see genuine remorse in the old man's eyes. Herbert Isola sat motionless, hands folded. Then, after an eternity that in reality lasted only seconds, he nodded slowly. "I believe you, Maximilian, and I accept your apology." The tension in the room noticeably dissolved. They ordered food, wine was poured, and gradually a conversation developed between the two men, at first hesitant, then increasingly relaxed, as they began to exchange memories of their early days as partners, of the hopes and dreams they had once shared. Isolde watched her father with a feeling of deepest admiration. His ability to forgive, after all the suffering that had been inflicted on him, touched her deeply. She felt Klaus' hand under the table, searching for hers, and she intertwined, her fingers with his, a silent promise that they would walk this path together. As the meal neared its end, Maximilian Glaser cleared his throat. "There is something else I want to address," he said, his gaze wandering to Klaus and Isolde. "My son has told me that you two have grown closer to each other." Isolde felt her cheeks redden. She and Klaus had not hidden their growing relationship from their families, but hearing it addressed so directly made her suddenly feel very exposed. "That is true," Klaus confirmed, his voice firm. Maximilian nodded slowly. "I must admit I was initially troubled, but now—" He smiled, a genuine if tired smile. "And now I think it might be the best thing that could have happened to our families, a chance to truly heal old wounds." Herbert looked at his daughter searchingly. "Isolde has her own mind. She has always known what she wants. And I trust her. Judgment," he turned to Klaus, "if she sees something special in you, then I suppose it is there." It was not an effusive blessing, but it was a beginning, a hesitant acceptance that meant more than both fathers perhaps realized. After the meal, their paths separated. Herbert and Isolde toward their modest apartment, Maximilian and Klaus back to their villa on the outskirts of town. As Klaus embraced Isolde in farewell, he whispered in her ear, "This is just the beginning. I promise you, we will have a future where the past no longer casts shadows on us." She wished she could share his optimism, but on the way home, Isolde could not help wondering if it could really be so simple. The wounds of 30 years of enmity, could they really be healed by a single dinner, an apology? What she did not know, while she and her father talked about the meeting, a completely different confrontation was taking place in the Glaser villa. Thomas Glaser, Klaus' older brother, was waiting for the return of his father and brother, his face a mask of cold anger. "What have you done?" He confronted his father as soon as he walked through the door. "You apologized to Herbert Isola. Have you lost your mind?" Maximilian, exhausted from the emotional evening, sank into an armchair. "It was the right thing to do, Thomas. After all these years, it was time to tell the truth." But Thomas' gaze wandered to Klaus, full of reproach. "This is your work, is it not? You and your new girlfriend, the Isola daughter." Klaus stepped forward, protectively. "It is not about Isolde. It is about correcting an old mistake." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Correcting a mistake? You have no idea what you have done. The documents you found, they are only the tip of the iceberg." He leaned forward, his voice now dangerously quiet. "There is more, Klaus. Things you do not know. Things that could ruin our company, our family, if they come to light." An ominous silence spread in the room. Maximilian turned pale, his hands trembling more than usual. "What are you talking about?" Klaus asked slowly, a growing suspicion that the abyss of the past was deeper than he had suspected. Thomas. Lips twisted into a humorless smile. You think you know the whole story. You have no idea, little brother. No idea what our father and I were willing to do to build this empire. At that moment, Klaus sensed that the peace they had believed to make that evening was only an illusion. The real battle for the past and the future of the Glaser and Eisler families had just begun. May passed into June, and with the warmer weather, Isolde and Klaus' relationship seemed to blossom as well. Despite their families' initial concerns, their meetings became more frequent, their conversations deeper, their touches more intimate. They discovered shared passions, not only for the sea and dancing, but also for films, for long walks on the beach, for deep conversations about books and dreams. Isolde found in Klaus someone who truly saw her, who admired her strengths and accepted her insecurities. And Klaus seemed to find in Isolde a counterpart that helped him be the person he wanted to be, not the one his family had made him. One evening, after a long day at the store, Isolde returned home to find a message from Klaus. Meet me at 8 o'clock at the yacht harbor. Wear something warm. The mysterious invitation made her heart beat faster. When she arrived at the harbor, Klaus was already waiting for her, a warm smile on his face. He led her to his boat, the Windgeist, which had been decorated for the occasion with string lights and a small table in the cockpit. "Beat, what is the occasion?" Isolde asked, touched by his effort. 2 months, he answered simply. Since the dance lesson, since I really got to know you. It was a perfect evening. They sailed a stretch along the coast, ate the gourmet picnic basket that Klaus had prepared, and finally anchored in a secluded bay, far from the city lights. Above them stretched a sky full of stars, below them the gentle rocking of the water. It is so peaceful here, Isolde said quietly, cuddled in Klaus' arms, a blanket over their legs. Yes, he agreed, his breath warm at her ear. Out here, everything else seems so far away, all the complications, the past. His voice trailed off, and Isolde sensed that something was troubling him. She turned in his arms to see his face. What is wrong, Klaus? You are so absent sometimes. Tonight, he sighed and pulled her closer. It is nothing, just family matters. Thomas is causing problems. Since the dinner with their fathers, Isolde had only briefly met Klaus' brother once, and the impression had not been positive. Thomas Glaser was a calculating man with sharp eyes and an even sharper business sense. He had barely given her a glance and had only spoken to Klaus about business matters. "What kind of problems?" she asked gently. Klaus shook his head. "He is angry about the reconciliation with your father. He sees it as weakness, as a threat to the company." Isolde frowned. Why should an apology threaten the company? Klaus hesitated as if struggling with himself. Thomas has made hints about other things that happened in the past, things that go beyond what my father did to yours. A cold shiver ran down Isolde's back, despite the warmth of the blanket and Klaus' arms. "What kind of things?" "I do not know exactly," he admitted. "He refuses to give details, but whatever it is, it scares him enough to threaten." "To threaten?" Isolde asked, alarmed. "Klaus, has he threatened you?" Klaus' face hardened. "And not me, you." Isolde's heart skipped a beat. "Me? But why? I've done nothing to him." "It is not personal," Klaus explained, his voice now tense. "It is about what you represent. The connection to your family, the possibility that more of the past will come to light." He took her face in his hands. "I would never allow him to harm you, Isolde. Never." The intensity in his eyes made her shiver. "I am not afraid of your brother," she said bravely, although the truth looked different. Klaus kissed her gently. "I know that. You are the bravest person I know. But Thomas, he is dangerous in a way you do not understand. He has connections, influence." He paused. "That is why I have made a decision." Isolde felt her stomach contract. "What kind of decision?" "I am leaving the family business," he said, with a determination she had never heard in him before. "I told my father this morning. I will sell my share and build something of my own, something that is not burdened by the past." Isolde stared at him incredulously. "But the company is your inheritance, your future. You have worked toward it for years." Klaus shook his head. "No, Isolde, you are my future." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I have from the first moment when I saw you in the rain, how you stopped to help a stranger." The words hit her like a wave, warm and overwhelming. She had known that their feelings for each other were deep, but to hear them so clearly and unequivocally spoken took her breath away. "I love you too," she whispered, surprised how easily the words came over her lips, how true they felt. He kissed her again, this time deeper, a fusion of hearts and hopes. When they finally separated, both breathless, he placed his forehead against hers. "It will not be easy," he warned. "Thomas will not give up without a fight. But together, we can withstand anything." In that moment, under the starry sky on the gently rocking boat, Isolde believed him. She believed that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle, to bring any secret to light and survive. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Isolde woke to violent knocking at the apartment door. Sleepy and confused, she slipped into her bathrobe and opened it, only to find herself facing two police officers. "Miss Eisel," the older of the two, asked, "We need to speak with you about Klaus Glaser." Isolde's blood froze in her veins. "What happened? Is he hurt?" The two officers exchanged a glance. "No, miss. Mr. Glaser was arrested early this morning on suspicion of fraud and embezzlement in connection with the family business." The world around Isolde began to spin. That cannot be. There must be a mistake. "The accusations come from his brother, Thomas Glaser," the officer explained. "He has presented evidence suggesting that Klaus has been misappropriating company funds for years." Isolde shook her head incredulously. "That is absurd. Klaus would never do such a thing. He is the most honest person I know." The officers remained unimpressed. "We need to ask you some questions, Miss Eisel. There are indications that you may be involved in the matter." At that moment her father stepped behind her, his voice calm but firm. "My daughter will not answer questions without a lawyer at her side. If you have questions, you can contact our legal counsel, Darty." The next days blurred into a nightmare of police interrogations, newspaper reports, and desperate attempts to reach Klaus. The accusations against him were serious. Allegedly, he had siphoned millions from the family business to start his own company and had tried to destroy incriminating documents. Isolde knew it could not be true. Klaus had opened his heart to her, had confided his doubts, his hopes, his plans for the future. He was not a fraudster, not a thief. After 3 days without contact, she finally received a brief call from him. His voice sounded tired but determined. "Isolde, listen to me," he said urgently. "I have done nothing. Thomas has pinned all this on me because he's afraid I will uncover the true story, that he and father have not only betrayed your father, but have been doing business with forged environmental reports for years. They have contaminated groundwater, manipulated soil tests. People have gotten sick, Isolde." "My God," she whispered, horrified. "How do you know this?" "I found more documents, shortly before Thomas reported me. Listen, they are in my apartment, in a safe behind the bookshelf in my study. The code is 2910, the date we first met. You have to get them before Thomas finds them." The connection was cut, and Isolde stared at her phone. Heart pounding up to her throat. What now? The accusations Klaus had raised were serious. Environmental pollution, fraud, possibly even health damage to people. If that was true, it was far more than a family dispute or an old business rivalry. She knew what she had to do. She had to find the documents before Thomas could destroy them. But how should she get into Klaus' apartment? The Glaser villa was surely guarded, especially now after Klaus' arrest. Isolde needed help, and she knew exactly who to turn to. She called her brother Victor, the fire officer. He had always been the practical one in the family, the one who kept a cool head in a crisis. So you want to break into the villa of a millionaire whose son has been arrested to steal documents? Victor summarized after she had explained the situation to him. That is madness, Isolde. It is not breaking in, she defended herself. Klaus gave me the code, and it is not just about him and me. If what he says is true, then the Glasers have knowingly poisoned the environment, endangered people. Victor sighed heavily. You know that as a firefighter and civil servant, I cannot support such a thing. I know, she said quietly. I should not have asked. A long pause followed, then, when do you want to do it? Isolde's heart leapt. Tonight. Thomas will be at the office during the day, and according to Klaus, the housekeeper Martha only works until 6. I cannot come with you, Victor warned, but I can be nearby in case something goes wrong, and I know someone who can help us with the surveillance. So it came that Isolde found herself at 8 o'clock in Victor's car on the way to the Glaser estate. Her brother had brought a friend, an IT expert, who could temporarily disable the villa's security systems. You have 10 minutes, the man explained, while typing on his laptop. I cannot turn off the cameras longer without arousing suspicion. Isolde nodded, her mouth dry with nervousness. She got out of the car, quickly crossed the lawn, and reached a side door that Klaus had said was rarely used. With trembling fingers, she entered the code he had given her for the electronic lock. The door opened silently. Isolde slipped in and found herself in a dark hallway. She knew the layout of the villa from Klaus' descriptions and moved purposefully toward his study. The room was exactly as he had described it. Cozy, with bookshelves on the walls, a large desk, and a window overlooking the garden. Isolde went to the middle bookshelf and pushed it aside, as Klaus had explained to her. Behind it appeared a small safe. With pounding heart, she entered the code 2910. A soft click and the door sprang open. Inside lay a brown envelope. Isolde grabbed it and opened it briefly to check the contents. Documents, photos, USB sticks. Exactly what Klaus had described. She put the envelope in her jacket and was about to close the safe when she heard a sound. Footsteps in the hallway. Panicked, she looked for a hiding place, but it was too late. The door opened, and Thomas Glaser stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold anger. Isolde Isola, he said, his voice dangerously calm. I had the feeling that Klaus would try to contact you, as I see I was right. But Isolde backed away, the envelope protectively under her jacket. What you have done to your brother is abhorrent, she said, with more courage than she felt. He stole nothing. You framed him because he uncovered the truth about your environmental crimes. Thomas' smile became colder. Environmental crimes, is that what he told you? He stepped closer. Give me the envelope, Isolde. Whatever my confused little brother told you, it is not true. He needs help, psychological help. He is obsessed with the idea of ruining the company ever since he found out how father betrayed your father. Isolde shook her head determinedly. I do not believe you. Klaus would not lie to me. Thomas sighed theatrically. Love makes blind, does it not? Did he tell you that he had been watching you for a long time before he accidentally met you in the rain? Did he tell you that he hired a private detective to find out everything about you? Your habits, your preferences, your weaknesses. An icy shiver ran down Isolde's back. That That is not true. No? Thomas pulled a phone from his pocket and showed her photos, pictures of her leaving her store, walking on the beach, sitting in a cafe, pictures that had been taken from a distance without her knowledge. This is obsession, Isolde, not love. Doubt gnawed at her, but she resolutely shook it off. Even if that is true, and I doubt it, it changes nothing about the facts in these documents. She took a step toward the door, but Thomas blocked her way. These documents are going nowhere, he said coolly, and frankly, neither are you. Isolde's heartbeat stopped for a moment. She recognized the threat in his words, the danger in his eyes. At that moment, she regretted not asking Victor to come in with her, but before Thomas could act, a loud bang sounded from the ground floor, followed by voices and heavy footsteps. Thomas turned abruptly, a curse on his lips. "That will be the police," Isolde said, suddenly filled with new hope. "Victor called them when our 10 minutes were up and I did not come back." Thomas' face contorted with anger. For a moment, Isolde thought he would attack her anyway, but then he ran to the window, opened it and jumped out into the garden. Seconds later, 2 uniformed police officers stormed into the room, followed by Victor, whose face was marked with worry. "Isolde, thank God," he called and hugged her tightly. "When you did not come back, I called the police." "Thomas," she gasped, pointing to the open window. "He fled. He tried to stop me." The officers hurried to the window, but Thomas had already disappeared. One of the policemen spoke into his radio, requesting backup, while the other questioned Isolde. She told him everything, about Klaus Kohl, the documents, Thomas' threats. Hesitantly, she handed over the envelope, knowing that this was now evidence. In the next hours, events unfolded rapidly. The documents were examined and found to be genuine. They contained detailed reports on forged environmental assessments, manipulated test results, and a list of places where the Glazer gas stations had contaminated groundwater. There was even correspondence between Thomas and various officials, who had been bribed to look the other way. The evidence was overwhelming. Klaus was released from custody, while the police now searched for Thomas, who had apparently left the country. Maximilian Glaser, weakened by his recent stroke, cooperated fully with the authorities and seemed as shocked by the extent of the crimes as everyone else. In the evening, after Klaus had been released, they met at Isolde's apartment. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and unshaven, but his face brightened when he saw her. "Isolde," he whispered, and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You are incredible. You risked everything for me." She leaned back to look at his face. "Thomas showed me photos of me that you apparently had taken before we met." Klaus briefly closed his eyes, shame covering his face. "It is true," he admitted. "After I found the first documents that exonerated your father, I was curious. I wanted to know who the family was that my father had betrayed. I hired a private detective to gather information about you and your family." He took a deep breath. "It was wrong, Isolde. I should have told you." Isolde looked at him for a long time, searching his eyes for the truth. "Did anything that happened between us have to do with this information? Did you use it to present yourself as someone who would appeal to me?" Klaus shook his head decisively. "No. When I met you in the rain, I had already decided that I wanted nothing more to do with the surveillance. It was creepy, intrusive. I had dismissed the detective 2 weeks before." He took her hands in his. "Everything that happened between us was real, Isolde. Every word, every feeling." She wanted to believe him. Deep in her heart, she did. But the revelations of recent days had made her more cautious, more distrustful. "I need time, Klaus," she said quietly. "Time to think about all this, to process it." Pain flickered in his eyes, but he nodded understandingly. "Of course, I understand that." He gently pressed her hands. "I will wait, Isolde. as long as necessary. The following weeks were a time of healing and reflection for both families. The revelations about environmental pollution led to a comprehensive investigation of the Glazer Corporation. Maximilian stepped down as CEO and handed control to an independent management team tasked with rehabilitating the company and repairing the environmental damage caused. Herbert Eisler received a formal public apology and generous financial compensation for the injustice done to him 30 years ago. But for him, the restoration of his reputation and the confirmation that he had always told the truth was more valuable than any money. Thomas remained missing, presumably somewhere in South America, beyond the reach of German justice. But his bank accounts were frozen, his assets seized. Isolde and Klaus remained in contact, but their relationship had entered a kind of waiting state. They met occasionally for coffee or a walk, talked about superficial things, avoided the deeper questions that stood between them. One day, almost 3 months after Thomas' flight, Isolde received an unexpected visit at her store. Martha, the longtime governess of the Glazers, stood before her, a dignified older lady with steel-grey hair and an upright posture. "Miss Eisel," she greeted with a slight nod. "I hope I'm not disturbing." "Not at all," Isolde replied, in surprise. "How can I help you?" Martha drew an envelope from her handbag. "Oh, I have come to give you this. It belonged to Klaus' mother, and I think you should have it." Confused, Isolde took the envelope. It contained an old photo. It showed 2 young women arm in arm, laughing into the camera. With a shock, Isolde recognized her own mother, Greta, clearly younger but unmistakable. The other woman had to be Helene Glazer, Klaus' mother. "They knew each other?" Isolde asked incredulously. Martha nodded. "They were best friends at university long before. Your fathers became business partners. When the dispute broke out, Maximilian forced Helene to break off contact. It broke her heart." The old lady sighed. "She never forgot your mother. On her deathbed she spoke of her, wished she had had the courage to stand up against her husband." Isolde stared at the photo, tears rising in her eyes. "My mother never mentioned that she knew Helene. And sometimes it is easier to bury certain memories," Martha said gently. "But I thought you should know. Perhaps it is a sign that the connection between your families does not consist only of fraud and bitterness." When Martha had gone, Isolde hurried home and showed her mother the photo. Greta broke into tears when she saw it and told Isolde the story of her friendship with Helene, how they had met, how close they had been, how painful the break had been. "I never stopped thinking about her," Greta confessed. "When I heard that she had died, I could not even go to the funeral." That night, Isolde lay awake, thinking about the tangled paths that connected her family with the Glazers. Friendship, betrayal, love, hate. Everything was interwoven in a complex pattern that stretched over decades. The next morning she made a decision. She would meet Klaus, listen to him, not for the sake of his apology, but for her own sake, to understand whether what she felt for him was strong enough to overcome the shadows of the past. She called him and arranged to meet him the coming Sunday after church service at the beach, where they had sailed for the first time. He was already waiting for her, his face hopeful but reserved. The sun made his dark hair shimmer golden, and the wind tousled it slightly. Without a word, Isolde handed him the photo of their mothers. Klaus stared at it for a long time, recognition and amazement spreading across his face. "They were friends," he said quietly. Isolde nodded. "Best friends, until our fathers quarreled. Martha brought me the photo." Klaus looked up, his eyes full of emotions. "What does this mean for us, Isolde?" She stepped closer to him, took his hands in hers. "It means that perhaps there was more between our families than just business and fraud, that there were real bonds, real friendship." She caught his gaze. "And it means that I am ready to start fresh, Klaus, with you, without the shadows of the past. His face brightened like the sun breaking through clouds. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," she answered firmly. "I love you, Klaus Glaser, despite everything, or perhaps even because of everything we have been through." He pulled her into his arms, kissed her with an intensity that reflected all the longing and waiting of the past months. When they separated, both breathless and with pounding hearts, he whispered against her lips, "I never stopped loving you, Isolde. Not one day, not 1 hour." On that day, they truly began anew, not as Isolde and Glaser, heirs to a history of fraud and bitterness, but simply as Klaus and Isolde, two people who had found each other, despite all adversities. Epilogue. Spring in Kiel was particularly beautiful this year. The sun shone warmly from the sky, the Baltic Sea glittered as if strewn with diamonds, and everywhere flowers bloomed in bright colors. It was as if nature itself wanted to celebrate what would happen on this radiant May day 1 year after. The turbulent events that had changed their lives forever. In the small church by the harbor, where Isolde prayed every Sunday, friends and family gathered. The old enmities were buried, new bonds had been formed. Herbert and Greta Isola sat in the front row next to Maximilian Glaser, who leaned on his walking stick but beamed with pride. Martha, the faithful governess, sat beside him, her usually stern expression softened by a rare smile. When the organ began to play, all heads turned to the entrance of the church. Isolde stood there, a vision in white, her dress simple and elegant, her face radiant with happiness. Her father offered her his arm, and together they walked down the aisle to Klaus, who awaited her at the altar, his gaze full of admiration and love. The ceremony was moving in its simplicity. They exchanged rings and promises, pledged each other fidelity and support in good times and in bad. When the priest declared them husband and wife, and they kissed, the congregation broke into jubilant applause. The celebration afterward took place at the Kiel Yacht Club, where they had once had their first real date. The Windgeist, Klaus' beloved boat, lay festively decorated in the harbor, ready for the honeymoon they would begin the next day. A sailing trip along the coast, just the two of them and the open sea. As the sun set and the city lights reflected in the water, Isolde and Klaus stood arm in arm on the club terrace, looking out over the bay. "Happy?" he asked quietly, his lips at her hair. "Completely," she answered, and it was the truth. The past year had brought many changes. Isolde had expanded her toy store, supported by a small start-up capital that Klaus had invested in her. He himself had completed his studies and founded a new company that focused on environmentally friendly energy solutions, a conscious contrast to his father's environmentally harmful legacy. Maximilian had slowly regained his health and now devoted his time and remaining wealth to environmental projects in an attempt to repair part of the damage his company had caused. Thomas had never been caught, but his crimes had been exposed, his reputation ruined. Herbert and Maximilian had found an unlikely peace, even a kind of friendship built on mutual respect and shared love for their children. Greta had begun writing a book about her friendship with Helene, about loss and rediscovery, about the circles that life sometimes draws. That night, as they were alone in their new shared apartment, Klaus held Isolde tight in his arms, grateful for the miracle that had brought them together. A coincidence in the rain, a dance lesson, an old secret, and now a shared future. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes I think our mothers somehow brought us together, from where they are now." Isolde smiled at the thought. It was comforting to believe that something greater had been at work, that from all the pain and separation, something beautiful had finally emerged. "I think you are right," she whispered and snuggled closer to him. "But whatever brought us together I'm simply grateful that we found each other. Outside, the sea roared, an eternal rhythm of ebb and flow. Inside, in the warmth of their embrace, Isolde and Klaus had finally found their harbour, in each other despite all the storms they had weathered. And if there was something they had learned from their story, it was this: sometimes the unexpected encounters and the most difficult challenges lead us exactly where we should be, to the people we should be with, to the love that awaits us, even when we least expect it.